Okay, so when first starting talking about Python, there are a few things you need to know about basically any programming language, and that is functionality and data are two of the key aspects that make up any program. And so in this first slide, we will be just viewing different data types. And I mean, there's one way to use a function or change it in some way. So the first data type is an integer, and it's represented by the top x equals 20. And what makes that one an integer is that it is a whole number. Second type of data is a floating point, or sometimes called a float. And it's a number with decimal places after it. And when we print it, it'll be evident. You can see the difference. The third data type is a string, and it's basically a collection of characters on the keys. Okay, so this next slide is showing the data after it is printed, after you run the function. At the top left corner, there is a green play button, and once you press that, it will run the program or display any errors if the program doesn't work. And at the bottom, where it says ln run, that shows that that kernel has ran, and the numbers being displayed 20, 20.0, and x are the different prints of those different data types. Now, as you can see, the integer only prints a whole number when it prints. And most of Python will default to an integer, but if you use any fraction, it will default to a floating point, and the floating point is the second one, and you can see it's 20.0, has a decimal place after it, and you can tell that the default is one decimal place, with aside from a rounding number, because we put in 20.00. And then the string is just what's printed x, and that's what we stored x as. Just the parentheses around the string at the very top where we called it, where we put x equals parentheses x parentheses, that's just saying use the characters within that parentheses as what you're defining it as. Okay, so this next slide deals with editing a variable and using the if function and the else function, and different expressions you can do mathematically to check those if statements. Okay, so the first if statement says if x equals 0, which basically is an expression that means does x equals 0. If it does, then you can change it by setting x to some other value. So we set it to x equals 1. And when we print it, when we run the module, you can tell that x has changed. So the next one says if x is less than 2, x equals x plus 1. So here's another one how you can change it. You can use the same variable, but just add something to it, minus something to it, divide something to it, multiply something to it, any operator to it, and it will change it. And then the next one's if x is greater than 3. And the same thing, we're just setting x to a generic value if. And then else is if it's the opposite, or if there's if you have multiple else statements, it's it checks that one, it checks the if statements, and then it goes the last possible thing it could do. It just does what it does. So, oh, and another thing to notice is that that we put colons after if, after most if else, kind of not operators, but functions and different stuff like that. So if else, they always have colons after them, and the thing that's within the if statement is always indented after. So this program, especially Python, is you have to indent everything after it. You're going to get an error. Okay, so this is showing the printed or ran program. And you can tell at the very bottom it ran. And you can tell that there's 4 print statements, so there's 4 numbers at the bottom. And the first one, as you can tell, went if it started out with 0, went through if it equals 0, which it did, change it to 1. So it just changed it to 1. So it printed it printed the first X before it went in the if statement, and it printed the next one within it. And then after that, X is still 1. So then it goes if X is less than 2, which it is, add 1 to it, and then print that number. So it went from 1 to 2. And the next one said if X is greater than 3, which it is not. So it skips lines 12 and 13 and goes to the next non-indented section, which is the else statement. And else just means basically if nothing else is true, just do it. Run that function. So for line 15, it printed just 0. And it didn't even print X, it just printed a number. You can just print numbers, you can just print strings by themselves. You can just print floating point values. Okay, so I will create some more videos in a few days talking about different conditional statements, different variable types. I will eventually get into arrays, objects, and classes. That's a big topic in Python. And while loops and for loops and some of the new videos. So thanks for watching and subscribe.